welcome to ILTV's Elections Arena. I'm Aaron Porras, and today in the ring, we'll be breaking down Israelis' top concerns going into the March 2nd elections. Joining us to discuss is columnist for Newsweek and editor of HistoryCentral.com, Mark Shulman, and former Likud Knesset member and the president of the Likud Supreme Court, Michael Kleiner. Thank you both so much for being with us, first of all. But let's move into our first topic. Now, with the third consecutive elections in Israel now just a month away, it's suspected that United States President Trump's peace plan will be the biggest issue swaying voters. But a new survey says that it's not very high on the list of concerns at all. So what are Israelis most concerned about going into the March 2nd elections? Well, 32%, nearly a third of the public, says that it's Prime Minister Netanyahu's investigations. Now, Michael, I'd like to start with you. Do you agree? Do you think that the investigations, the indictments against the Prime Minister are going to be the biggest deciding factor going into the elections?
No, I believe that the peace plan, whether people say it or not, it will be the main issue. The capability of Gantz to be Prime Minister will be an issue. And the dissonance between people who say that Bibi Netanyahu is the only suitable candidate, but they don't want him. And then you start to try people to explain, if you believe he's the best man, why do you don't vote it? And they start to stammer and say, because his wife, because his child, because of... Some of them also say because of the indictment. But I believe that the issue of the indictment will be cleared up through the election campaign, and people will see there's no case to answer.
Well, so that's ridiculous, of course. No case to answer. First of all, whether there is a case not to be answered, we're not going to be cleared up by the election campaign, because the reality is, if he appears in court before the election, is very doubtful. The court case itself is going to take over the next year or two.
Will anything really happen in terms of advancing this between now and a month?
Nothing will. I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu was both brilliant and terribly stupid in what he did in the last week or so, in terms of the whole question of requesting parliamentary immunity and then pulling it back. The request was a mistake in the sense that he had to pull it back. He didn't realize that they would be outmaneuvered by blue and white. On the other hand, by taking it out, he removed it as an election issue. So it's less of an issue right now. You know, people can't say, well, don't vote for Bibi because he'll get a parliamentary immunity. That's off the table at this point. He's not going to get it because this can't happen again. Look, I don't think there's any issue that's going to change this election in any which way. I think Israelis at this point have a fairly good idea who they want to vote for. The question is, are they going to come out and vote? That is the only issue in this election. Are they going to come out and vote? No one who voted last time for blue and white is suddenly going to vote for Likud because Netanyahu has flown to Uganda or brought back Naama from Moscow or anything else that he's done. And no one who voted for Likud last time is suddenly going to say, oh, he was actually indicted now I can't vote for him.
Well, so Michael actually touched on something very interesting, which is that while a third of Israelis are saying that they think the indictments in this case is going to be the biggest deciding factor, as you said correctly, most Israelis also believe that Netanyahu is the best man for the job ahead of the elections going to be Prime Minister. Why?
A third of the people who voted against him, I mean, there's more than a third voted against him, so I think it's the most important. So they voted against him. It reflects, if you told me that 80% of the country said that indictments were the most important thing, then I would say the election results are going to be different. But a third represents blue and white's votes pretty much. It tracks almost identical to blue and white's votes.
And so the fact that
people who believe that Netanyahu is the best man for the job and they cannot argue it, but they don't want to vote for Netanyahu because they are anti-Netanyahu. So they try to find an excuse. So the accusations, the indictment, is a good excuse.
I see. All right. Well, now the second biggest issue is, of course, the cost of living and housing. So what are the biggest issues related to the cost of living and housing that Israelis are facing, aside from the obvious, which is the fact that it's a very high cost?
Oh, look, the problem is that Netanyahu created for the last 10 years an envelope of a strong economy. This envelope that he created is the most important factor in the ability of Israel to find solution to the housing. Kahlon, the Minister of Finance, tried his best. There was some slowdown. There was some tens of thousands of apartments that were sold to young people in a lower price. It's not enough. I believe Netanyahu can say, I was the one who created the platform, the springboard that enables our strong economy to find a solution for young people, including housing.
Okay, look, of course that's absurd, because the reality is over the 11 years that Netanyahu has been prime minister, the price of housing has more than doubled, and the price of food and everything else has also become the most expensive in the world practically. Tel Aviv is one of the most expensive cities in the world. It's the most expensive McDonald's by far in the world, by a percentage of 50% more McDonald's costs
Well,
more
it's
in this
also a lot
country.
more kosher.
Right, but even the non-kosher ones. Listen, Tel Aviv is an incredibly expensive city, and that's not even taking account the average Israeli has a lower buying power than the average European or average American or Japanese. Look, the same person has been prime minister for 11 years. Whether you think he's done a great job with the economy or not, he has to take responsibility for the fact that he's done nothing about the cost of food and the cost of and
What
the
is
housing.
the opposition offering?
They're not. That's part of the problem. I mean, look, the opposition. Look, there are only two solutions to the problems. Number one, in terms of housing, you have to do massive building and probably public building in order to take care of the housing question. You can't let the private market do it because it's clearly not doing it. It's not succeeded. You have to also sell a tremendous amount of government land, which the government has this strange policy. It owns most of the land in the country, but it tries to get the most it possibly can for the land that it sells. So if you get the most you possibly can for the land that it sells, the price is going to remain high. So unless you have a massive policy of massive building, build a new city, let's say, between Netanya and Herzliya, I'm just throwing that out, but do something really large, you can't bring down the price of housing. And this government is not going to do anything large of that kind. We're only going to build in Yehuda v'Shomron. Number two, in terms of housing, food, it's very simple. We keep on talking about getting rid of the monopolies, Yivu Makbil, which is called, gray marketing, all those things. They talk about it, but nothing really happens when it comes to those things. They talked about removing the Israel Standards Authority and saying we're only going to go with the standard. Well, enough is the standards of the United States and Europe. If it has United States or American or European standards, that's good enough for us. No, the manufacturers scream. The politicians who get money from the politicians say, "Oh, well, wait, so we can't do that." So they didn't do that. Look, the problems are complex. They're deep, but there's no reason to expect the same government that has been in power for 11 years is going to suddenly tackle this problem that's avoided for 11 years.
There's a big misery in this country. For example, it's really a problem that you can hardly get an order to a restaurant in Tel Aviv. It's hard to get a place on the aeroplanes with the cheap flights to Europe. It's really bad times in Israel. People feel very bad. You go in the street and you see miserable people. The country has a much stronger economy. Everybody lives better. There are gaps, and we have to do the next 4 years to close the gaps. And this is one reason that we need a capable prime minister who understands economy.
But I mean, on the one hand, you have, as Mark said, a government that's been in place for over a decade, and they haven't fixed this issue.
You remember what was the situation in Israel 10 or 20 years ago under the Bolshevik government of the Labor Party?
Okay, we're talking 40 years ago.
The
last time the Labor Party ran this country for a long period of time was 40 years ago.
No, Baiga Shochat ran the finance 20
years ago. So how long does it take
to pass? It was a disaster.
What?
How long does it take to pass something that would fix this?
Okay,
that would help?
Okay, it would help. It probably takes 2 years to have an impact in terms of housing.
So really any government that's in power because the average government is in place for 2 to 3.
Right, it has to make this.
3 months, you mean? 3 months.
Well, lately, yes.
It has to make those decisions.
It
has to make those decisions to do it. They have to make decisions to do things that this government hasn't been willing to do. I mean, few Israeli governments have been willing to take drastic action. I mean, I personally.
So it's not exactly the right or the Likud's fault.
It's not a right or left issue at all.
You remember the time that Benjamin Netanyahu was Minister of Finance? Everybody, there's a consensus, even in Haaretz.
He was the best Minister of Finance this country ever had, and following the law that you rise to the level of incompetence, he should have stayed as Minister of Finance. This country would be doing great if he had been Minister of Finance all these years. Unfortunately, what he did was he put all sorts of people in the Ministry of Finance, his opponents politically, so that he could make sure they don't succeed by throwing them to the most difficult position.
I totally agree with the first part. I totally disagree with the second part of what Mark said. He was a great Minister of Finance, and as a Prime Minister, he has the abilities to guide the next Minister of Finance how to fix those economic problems, thanks to the big, good infrastructure he was building in the last 10 years.
We don't have infrastructure in this country. Let's stop there. One of the biggest problems we have in this country is the infrastructure has been neglected. We've made slow progress.
I mean financial infrastructure.
The financial infrastructure is there, but the financial infrastructure we have in this country is terrific and yet very problematic. What do I mean by that? We are the leading country in terms of startups. We get $25 billion a year in VC capital every year that's financing a country, plus about $20 billion in exits. Companies that are bought by foreign nationals. Sure. 350 international companies have their R&D headquarters, or at least significant R&D activity in Israel. That is great. That is what's powering our economy without a question of a doubt. On the other hand, we don't have any large Israeli companies anymore at this point. Every one of the companies that we have is either a startup that's about to be bought, or we have centers of R&D from various foreign countries that tomorrow morning could decide to move it, or could decide to move their employees to Palo Alto. So it's a great situation. Our situation in the economy, I'm not going to say it's bad, but it's also very fragile. We have to be careful about it. We have to realize that it's fueled by foreign investment, by VC capital, and by the exits that go on.
I remember 20 years ago when we were more pessimistic, I remember it was Netanyahu who said we have one big asset, it is the Jewish brain. And I agree, it is a collective effort. We have many brilliant people, scientists, startups are well, but also we have a good guidance. Same brains in the first 40 years produced a socialist, Bolshevik economy, and the moment the economy of Israel was opened and free economy, a free market, headed by Netanyahu and others from the Likud, everything was changed.
Okay, I would argue, and I don't want to go too back to history, because it's my area, that if you look at the economy, what Israel did between 1948 and 55 and 56, how it grew and took care of, as best it could, doubling its population and creating an infrastructure for when none existed, the Bolshevik, quote-unquote, economy, which wasn't really Bolshevik, did quite well under the circumstances. The reality is
everything in the black book of Pinchas Sapir.
It built things when you couldn't do it any other way. There was no way. The grand economists in 1951, 52 said we have to have a balanced budget, and basically the Bolsheviks, quote-unquote, the Labor Party said, no, we can't do that. We can't take a million immigrants and deal with a balanced budget at the same time.
So we took million immigrants from the Soviet Union at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, with a free economy.
Well, and that's part of the reason the economy has done so well, is those immigrants. Let's understand that.
Agreed.
There are two
Totally
reasons.
agreed.
There are two reasons. It's that immigration and the decision in this country to leave certain parts of R&D in the army, and those people all came out of the army and have done tremendous work since then.
All right, well, I want to move on to our next topic of concern, which you actually touched upon earlier. You said the security is number 3, is the third biggest concern in Israel, of course. More Israeli respondents are apparently optimistic than they were a few months ago about the security situation, and that's in spite of all the issues that have now arisen in the wake of the Trump peace plan. Why do you think that is?
Once again, because the policy of Israel, on one hand, to allocate the resources to the army to strengthen our defense forces, and on the other hand, to do the political opening with the Arab world. Policy and security are connected. Undoubtedly, the relationship with the United States of America, even at the Obama time, but especially at the Trump time, the securing of the aid to Israel for the security, which was done, by the way, by Netanyahu with Obama in the last days of Obama. Maybe Trump wouldn't have approved such a big amount. And now the relationship with Trump. And on the other hand, what? He agreed. No, because it was already...
No, it's past the set.
It is set by Obama. Right. He had no say about it. And now approved by Congress. And now the relationship with Russia on the other hand. And the influence with other strong countries in the world, China, India, and the opening to the Arab world just the day before, yesterday. The opening with an Arab country, the Sudan, which is symbolic.
We're going to get
because
to that
the three nodes of Khartoum were started there in '67. So all this helped us to create a secure envelope for Israel. And also with Hamas, it is a prudent policy which is not, running towards conflicts where one can avoid it.
Now, I want to kind of change the question a little bit. Why is the Trump peace plan supposedly going to be such a big influence on the coming elections when it's very unlikely to pass because it doesn't have any support on the other side, on the Palestinian side?
Okay, I don't really think it's going to become a big item in the election. I think it was a ploy by Prime Minister Netanyahu to get the headlines on the same day that the Knesset was going to remove his immunity. I mean, you've got to admit, this is a beautiful political play to be able to do that on the same day that the Knesset was going to...
So you say Trump is working for Netanyahu?
No, Trump is helping him out, the same way Netanyahu will help Trump out. It's one hand washes the other. There's no question about that. But look, I don't think people in Israel, we all talked about it, us sitting around, commentators talk about the Trump peace plan, we write about it, et cetera, but the average Israeli really doesn't care about the Trump peace plan, because forget the fact that the Palestinians aren't about to accept it, our people aren't about to accept it if it was, as a whole. No one in this country believes peace is around the corner. If once upon a time there was a high percentage of Israelis who hoped, and they're willing to let their hopes gain over the reality that peace was around the corner, that all we have to do is do X, Y, and Z on the peace, I think the second Intifada and the events that have happened in Gaza and to a lesser extent in Lebanon have convinced Israelis that it's going to be a long time until we actually achieve peace. And so therefore, let's deal with some other things in the meantime, whether it's the cost of living or whether it's our long-term security issues long-term, because peace is not about to break out anytime soon.
All right, now our next issue is actually religion and state. We're kind of flying through these a little bit, but it's good. Our next issue is religion and state and the issues between that. There's the arguments of religious coercion, and then of course secular coercion from the other side. Is Lieberman going to be the unlikely winner in this issue, or is that his voter base anyway, and it's probably not going to change?
It's his voter base in any case. Look, the issue of that is actually the soft underbelly for the Likud, and they understand that, because in 1983 an arrangement was made with Agudath Yisrael, or the more liberal of the Haredi movement, to involve them, and they would support Likud in return for whatever was changed, and a lot of things changed since then. Before that took place, the percentage of Haredim who worked in the workplace was identical to non-Haredim. Today it's 30% less.
And rising, though.
The rising numbers are already questioning whether it's actually really rising or not. Among women, possibly. Among men, not so much. So there's been this arrangement that's taken place. It's one of the reasons successfully Likud has remained in power. Politically, it was a brilliant move. It's kept Likud more or less in power all of these years. Now, the problem is that most of the population is not comfortable with it. It's not the number one issue. If it was the number one issue, Likud would be voted out without a question. But it's not anyone's number one issue, but it's number 2 or 3. It bothers them. It bothers them every time, God forbid, they lose a loved one and they have to deal with the Haredim when it comes to the cemetery and those issues. It bothers them if they have to get a divorce. It bothers them with marriage a little bit less, but it bothers them with marriage. And when those things come up, it suddenly becomes very important to them. So dealing with this fundamental issue, which Ben-Gurion wasn't willing to deal with in 1949, no one has been willing to touch this third rail of politics.
Mike?
First of all, the left was ready to make deals with the Haredi all over the time. Shulamit Aloni was the one who said that she's
as Mark
ready.
Said, this issue has many administrations
to
have
wear
come
a
and gone.
Shtreimel. Shulamit Aloni said that, or Weizmann, Ezra Weizmann.
Four-piece. When they thought, in other words, the deal was always, I'll go to speak to the Haredi if I can. Now they no longer care about peace. So.
But they were ready to make deal. Lieberman, by the way, attacks Gantz. He said Gantz will go with the Haredim as well as Netanyahu. The story is very simple. In April, Lieberman hardly passed the threshold. His base of Russian veterans and old people is dwindling. Young people, young Russian immigrants, or kids of Russian immigrants vote like Israelis. So he lost his base, and he found an issue to survive and to take some votes from the left side of the map, and this he will continue to do, and some people go after him because it's a demagoguery that sells, and there are some population that unfortunately are anti-religious.
But also
the Haredi will be involved in a slowly, gradually, by agreement, in the market, in the work market, in the army. It will take time, but they are, today we speak that demographically, the Jews are stronger than Arabs in Judea and Samaria, and they're very proud about it, and everybody speaks about demography. Who is the biggest contributor to our demographic advantage? The Haredi.
Yeah, well, the reality is, look, the Haredim, it's true. That's part of the growth in demography. The problem, of course, is their involvement in the workforce. Also, their attempt politically to do certain things in the last 2 years before the set of elections. For instance, passing the law that limited grocery stores being open on Shabbat started to bothering people. And so other little things that bothered people, stopping the work on the railroads. So the railroads had all sorts of things that were done politically.
But all these things didn't add up.
Well, they added up. Of course they added up.
And shops in Shabbat also disturb people, small merchants who want a free day in a week and cannot compete with the big supermarkets. And one day that of rest is also a part of the life of the other democratic states. And I believe it is also a social issue and not only a religious issue. And the people of Ramat Aviv, which are all the left, affluent neighborhood in Tel Aviv, when they wanted to open a supermarket on Saturday, they were demonstrated against it, not for religious reasons, but for the social reasons. They wanted one free day.
Look, the reality is, like I said, this problem has not been dealt with throughout the history of the state. No one is willing to really deal with it. It was easy at the time. Both sides thought the other side would disappear. Ben Gurion thought that the Haredim would disappear. They were a remnant from Europe and they would be gone in 10 years and he didn't have to worry about it. The Haredim thought the state was not going to last, so they didn't have to worry about it either. So no one really dealt with the issue, and it's grown and grown and grown. No one is willing to deal with it because politically, as long as the issue of left and right is over peace and war, or however you want to define it, Palestinian rights or whatever, then anyone's willing to go to the ultra-religious and say, give me your vote in return for support on my main, most important issue. If that wasn't the main issue, this would have changed.
If you would judge polls, you will see that the streets, the Haredim, the voters in the Haredim, though they act according to what the rabbis tell them, but practically the Haredi streets is more right-wing than the Likud street. Both Shas voters and also Agudat Israel voters. Right. So the leadership is not free to go with the left.
All right, well, unfortunately, I know we had other topics that I wanted to get to, but unfortunately we've run out of time. So that's all the time we have in the elections arena. I'd like to thank our guests, Michael Kleiner and Mark Schulman, for joining us. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. Also, remember that for more news from ILTV, please follow us on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku pages. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next time.